There are disasters explained by weather, technical failure, or the human factor. And then there are those where everything intertwines with something inexplicable, leaving the feeling that fate had been leading to this point long before takeoff. Flight 691 is one of those. Yeti Airlines operated a regular domestic route from Kathmandu to Pokhara, 200 kilometers, less than half an hour in the air. Pokhara is a tourist destination, a city on the shore of a lake, and behind it, the Himalayas with their 8,000-meter peaks. This view is what draws people here. Some come for the mountains, some for the silence, some just want to see what they have seen in photographs. There are different ways to get there. The bus winds along serpentines, hugs the slopes, crawls along gorges. It is long, exhausting. Drivers honk at every turn, passengers get carsick, and outside the window is an abyss just a few meters from the wheels. Therefore, many choose the plane. Half an hour and you are there. Without serpentines, without nausea, with that sticky fear of heights when the bus enters another turn over a precipice. Yeti Airlines flies aircraft from the French-Italian consortium ATR, turboprops, twin-engine for medium-haul transport. Reliable, according to statistics. Such planes fly all over the world, in Scandinavia, Southeast Asia, Africa, places where distances are short and airfields are not always ideal. Flight 691 was operated on an ATR 72500, registration number 9NANC. The aircraft was manufactured in 2007, 15 years without complaints. Regular maintenance, scheduled inspections, part replacements on schedule. 2 Canadian Pratt & Whitney engines, specifically for high altitudes and heat. A machine that knew these routes better than most pilots. Hundreds of times it had risen from Kathmandu and landed in Pokhara. Hundreds of times, without incident. The morning of January 15, 2023. Tribhuvan International Airport, Kathmandu. An ordinary morning. The usual terminal bustle. People with suitcases, announcements in Nepali and English. The smell of coffee from the cafe on the second floor. The aircraft is being prepared for departure. Technicians are finishing the pre-flight inspection, fuelers are driving away. Everything is on schedule. The crew, 4 people, all Nepalese. The captain, Kamal KC, 58 years old. Flight instructor, 32 years at the controls. 21,900 flight hours. A man who didn't just fly himself, he taught others to fly. For years. Hundreds of cadets passed through his hands. Young pilots, who later became captains themselves, remembered his lessons, his manner of explaining, his calmness in difficult situations. If there is a concept of reliable in aviation, then Kamal KC was its embodiment. Colleagues trusted him implicitly. Management put him on difficult flights. He was one of those who did not panic.
Who had seen it all, who knew what to do. The co-pilot, Anju Katiwada, 44 years old, 16 years in civil aviation, 6,400 hours. One of 6 female pilots in the company. Not many for Nepal, not a few for someone who did not come to the profession right away. She was one of those who achieved everything on her own, without connections, without patronage, just perseverance and thousands of hours of training. On board were 2 flight attendants. One of them, Ocean Ale, recorded a short video a few minutes before the passengers boarded. Something playful, light, a smile at the camera, a wave of the hand. She posted it on TikTok, the ordinary gesture of a person who does not know they are doing it for the last time. The video would later spread across the network. People would look at her face and think she didn't know. She was just living her ordinary day. Around 10 in the morning, 68 passengers board the ramp, 53 Nepalese, 5 Indians, a married couple from South Korea, perhaps a honeymoon, perhaps just a vacation. They held hands as they walked to the plane. 1 Australian, 1 Argentine, he was traveling alone with a backpack and a camera. 1 Irishman, 1 Frenchman, 4 children, the youngest less than 3 years old. People who are in no way connected to each other except for one thing. They bought a ticket for the same flight, a random sample, a random coincidence. In the cabin, 68 seats, almost a full load.
Someone puts a bag on the shelf. Someone is already sitting, buckled up, and looking at their phone. Flight attendants walk down the aisle, check belts, answer questions. The smell of conditioned air, the hum of ventilation. At 10:33, The ATR-72 lifts off the runway. 72 people on board. 27 minutes to Pokhara. Less than a Netflix episode. Less than a lunch break. The route goes over the mountains. Here the weather can change in minutes. Wind, cloud cover, turbulence. All of this is part of the local norm. Pilots who fly in Nepal get used to this. They know that mountains are not just scenery outside the window. Mountains affect airflow, create vortices, and can hurl a plane down or up without warning. But at the controls is an instructor who knows these air corridors by heart. Takeoff went according to plan. The climb, as well. It is calm in the cabin. Light shaking, nothing more. Someone is dozing, head back on the headrest. Someone looks out the window. Green slopes drift by below. White ribbons of rivers in the gorges. Someone scrolls through their phone, although there is almost no connection at this altitude. About 20 minutes after takeoff, the plane begins its descent. Pokhara is already close. Below are rooftops, greenery, river bends. The lake is visible, the very one tourists come here for. From above, it looks like a shard of mirror embedded in a green valley. In the cockpit, everything goes according to procedure.
Kamal is sitting on the right, in the co-pilot's seat. This is not a mistake. It was planned that way. He is acting as an observer and instructor. Anju is on the left, in the captain's seat. She is flying the machine. He monitors and prompts if necessary. A standard setup for a training flight. This is how they teach. This is how experience is passed on. Anju is focused, hands on the yoke, gaze on the instruments, on the runway ahead, back to the instruments. She had done this hundreds of times, but every approach to landing is a separate task. You cannot relax here. Kamal observes silently. Occasionally he says something briefly, a confirmation, a clarification. His voice is calm. He has seen thousands of landings. This one is no different from the others. The crew goes through the checklist. Landing gear down. 3 green indicators. Everything is normal. Altitude is falling. 500 meters. 400. 300. 200. In the cabin, there is nothing alarming. Someone laughs. Perhaps they remembered something funny. Someone talks to their neighbor. A child in the 3rd row fidgets in the seat. The mother adjusts his belt. A couple of minutes until landing. You can already feel the plane slowing down, the air becoming thicker, the ground approaching. One of the passengers, an Indian man named Sonu Jaiswal, is flying with 3 friends. They are sitting together, in a middle row, joking with each other. Sonu takes out his phone, opens Facebook.
Presses go live, not because he senses danger, just to film how they land, to show friends and relatives, to brag about the trip. A small thing, a silly thing, but why not? The camera looks into the cabin. You can see the seat backs, the backs of people's heads, the light from the windows. The sun hits from the right, illuminating dust motes in the air. The hum of the engines is heard, steady, familiar, soothing. Scraps of conversation in Nepali, in Hindi, someone's laughter. Sonu says something to the camera, smiles. For the next 90 seconds, he records his own death. He doesn't know it. No one on board knows it. They think that in 2 minutes they will be picking up their luggage. At 10:57, Flight 691 crashes. Not on the runway, not in a field. At the very edge of a gorge, near the river, a few hundred meters from the airport. So close, and so hopelessly far. Several people on the ground see it with their own eyes. Someone ran out at the sound. Someone was just looking at the sky, waiting for the plane, wanting to film it as it landed. One person manages to point their phone. On the recording, the plane rolls onto its wing and goes down. An unnatural bank, the nose pitched up, and then the fall. A few seconds, and a column of black smoke rising above the trees. Silence, and then the screams of people running toward the crash site, realizing that running is already pointless. Rescuers arrive quickly. Fire trucks, ambulances, police.
But there is almost no one to save. Debris is scattered along the slope. Part of the fuselage is in the gorge. Part is on the edge of the precipice. Seats, pieces of skin, passengers' belongings. A suitcase split open upon impact. A child's toy fell out of it. A teddy bear, almost undamaged. It lies on the grass as if someone placed it there. Next to it, things that are impossible to look at. 71 bodies are pulled from the wreckage. most in fragments. It is not possible to identify everyone. Some are later identified by DNA, dental records, jewelry. Some passengers apparently survived the impact, but were trapped in the burning wreckage. They could not get out. 2 are pulled out still alive. Rescuers hear groans and clear pieces of metal with their hands. They are rushed to the hospital. Doctors do everything possible. But less than an hour later, both die. Injuries incompatible with life. Internal damage that cannot be fixed. 72 people. Not a single survivor. When this is officially announced, weeping begins in the crowd at the airport. Relatives who came to meet the flight, they waited and they received. Just not what they expected. The question that arises immediately, what happened? The plane was airworthy, technical documentation in order. The last inspection, a few days before the flight, no remarks. The weather, within normal limits. Yes, mountains, yes, drafts are possible, but nothing critical. Visibility is good, wind moderate.
The crew, one of the most experienced in the company. This is not a disaster that can be written off to an obvious cause, not a case where everything is clear from the first minutes. Experts pay attention to the video filmed from the ground. A few seconds before the crash, the plane's nose pitches up sharply, too sharply. Then the left wing goes down. The machine seems to lose its footing, falling through the air, a movement that is impossible to correct at such an altitude. These are classic signs of a stall: loss of lift, loss of speed, loss of control. A stall is when the plane stops flying, when the air no longer supports the wing, when the speed falls below the critical point and the machine just drops down. At high altitude, this can be corrected: lower the nose, gain speed, level out. At 200 meters, there is no time. But why? Why did a healthy plane with an experienced crew enter a stall during the landing approach? A few hours after the disaster, the Nepalese authorities create a commission. The next day, rescuers find the flight recorders, both the voice and parametric recorders. Orange boxes, dented but intact. The black boxes are sent to Singapore. There, the equipment for decoding. There, the specialists who know how to read this data. A week passes, 2, 3. Families wait for answers. Journalists ask questions. The airline is silent. Authorities say the investigation continues. A month later, a preliminary report is published. In it, the transcript of the last minute of conversations in the cockpit, and the parametric data that explains everything. And nothing. Here is what happened. Kamal KC sat on the right, Anju Katiwada on the left. She was flying the machine, he was observing. A normal setup. After the gear was extended, 3 green lights on the panel, Anju turned off the autopilot, switched to manual control. Everything according to procedure, as it should be at this stage. Hands on the yoke, gaze on the runway. Altitude is falling. 5 seconds later, she asked to set the flaps to 30 degrees, standard configuration for landing. Flaps increase lift, allowing the plane to fly slower and approach the runway more safely. Flaps 30, descending, Kamal confirmed. He reached with his left hand toward the center console. There, between the seats, are the levers. Several levers standing side by side. The flap lever, the engine control levers, the propeller feathering levers. For a man with 20,000 flight hours, this movement is automatic. The hand itself knows where to go. Muscle memory, refined by thousands of repetitions. He didn't even look at the console. There was no need. He had done this so many times he could have done it with his eyes closed. The hand landed on a lever. Not the right one. He didn't notice. Anju didn't notice. She was looking at the runway, controlling the descent. No one noticed. There was no alarm, no warning.
Just a hand that landed on the neighboring lever. The parametric data recorded. The flaps did not move, not by a degree. They stayed in the same position as before. But the propeller RPM of both engines simultaneously dropped, sharply, 25%. Then, lower. Torque began to drop to 0. Both engines entered feathering mode.
Feathering is when the propeller blades turn parallel to the airflow. This is done when an engine fails, so that the propeller doesn't create resistance. But in normal flight, with working engines, it's a disaster. The blades turned, thrust disappeared. Both engines, which a second ago were pulling the plane forward, turned into dead weight. With one movement, one wrong movement, Kamal KC turned off both engines. At an altitude of 200 meters. At a speed that was already low for a landing approach. In the final seconds in the cockpit, voices. First, bewilderment. Loss of power. Why? Both pilots see it. The instruments show. There is no thrust. But why? The engines are healthy. There is fuel. Everything was fine a second ago. Kamal moves the engine control levers to maximum. But it does nothing. The RPM doesn't grow. Thrust doesn't appear. The propellers are already feathered. They need the other lever, the very one he accidentally moved. But he doesn't understand this. Anju doesn't understand. On the instruments, there is no clear indication of what happened. There is only the result, no power. They try to do something.
In their voices, growing tension. Not panic, they are professionals, but lack of understanding. They don't know what happened. They are fighting the effect without seeing the cause. Seconds. They have only seconds. The plane is losing speed. Without thrust, without engines, it's just a glider. A heavy glider that is not designed for gliding. The nose pitches up. It's an instinctive attempt to maintain altitude, but it's a mistake. It accelerates the stall. The wing goes down. The left wing drops. Stall. Ground. Kamal Casey's body was recovered from the wreckage, identified by documents, by uniform, by remains. He was found in the forward part of the fuselage, where the cockpit was. The body was badly damaged, but identification was possible. Anju Katiwada's body was never found. Rescuers worked for several days. They combed the wreckage, sifted the earth, descended into the gorge. 71 bodies, 1 missing. 72 people were on board. 71 found. They searched for her longer than the others, checked every fragment, compared with records. Nothing. Maybe it burned up completely. The temperature during the fire reached such levels that only bones remained of some bodies. Maybe it was swept away upon impact. The plane broke up in midair, and some of the wreckage was scattered over hundreds of meters. Maybe, and this sounds like mysticism, but it is a fact, she simply wasn't found. Among all this chaos, among the wreckage and ash, one body disappeared.
She came to aviation to be closer to her husband, whom the sky had taken, and the sky took her. Entirely. Anju Katiwada did not enter aviation right away. In 2006, she was 27, an ordinary woman, a young mother, holding a 1-year-old child, a boy who had only just started walking. Her husband was a co-pilot at Yeti Airlines. He flew cargo flights. Not as prestigious a job as passenger transport, but stable. He loved to fly. She loved him. In that year, he died. A cargo flight. The plane was carrying food to a remote area, a place that could not be reached by road. There are many such places in Nepal, villages cut off from the world, where everything is delivered by air. Food, medicine, fuel. Small planes that land on short strips carved into the slopes of mountains. Something went wrong. The details, as usual, are sparse. Official reports in Nepal are not always published in full. All 9 crew members died, her husband among them. She found out that evening. Someone from the company called. The voice on the phone was official, sympathetic. Words that mean nothing. We are sorry. We did everything possible. Please accept our condolences. She was left alone, with a child, with a void, with photographs on the wall, and his uniform in the closet. People cope with grief in different ways. Some withdraw into themselves. They shut down. They stop living and begin to exist.
Some break, and this is not a metaphor, it is literal. Something inside breaks, and the person can no longer put themselves back together. Some get angry, at fate, at God, at the airline, at the whole world. And some, and this is a rarity, turn pain into fuel. They take all this grief, all this horror, and they do something with it. They don't let go. They don't forget. They use it. Anju received an insurance payout. This was the money she was entitled to as a pilot's widow. Not a huge sum of money, but enough. She could have spent it on anything. On housing, on the child, on just living for several years without thinking about work, healing her wounds, gathering her strength. She spent it on flight school. A decision that seemed strange to many, even insane. Your husband died in a plane crash, and you go to study to be a pilot, into the same profession that killed him? But she didn't explain. She didn't make excuses. She just did it. She went to the United States. She left her child with her parents. It was hard, but there was no other way. She studied there. Hours in the simulator, hours in the air. Theory, practice, exams, English, a language she wasn't confident in. Loneliness, longing for her son. And persistence, the blunt, iron persistence of a person who has already lost everything and has nothing left to fear. She received her qualification. She returned to Nepal. In 2010, she got a job as a pilot for the very same airline where her husband had worked.
This was no coincidence. This was her choice, conscious, hard-won. She wanted to fly where he flew, to see what he saw, to do what he did. Maybe, and this is just speculation, but it suggests itself, to be closer to him, at least this way, at least in this sky, over these mountains, on these routes. She could not bring him back, but she could take his place. Over the next 13 years, she flew 6,400 hours. That is a lot. Thousands of flights, thousands of takeoffs and landings, thousands of passengers who entrusted her with their lives. She married again, not right away, but after several years. She gave birth to a second child. She continued working. She balanced it all, as millions of women do, only her work was at an altitude of 10,000 meters. Friends said she loved the sky, truly, not just as a job, but as a part of herself. She spoke about flights with the same expression on her face that others have when speaking about their children or about love. This was her place, her life. She wanted to become a captain, a full-fledged one. Not a co-pilot, not a trainee, a captain, the left seat, the primary person in the cockpit, the one who makes the decisions. On January 15, 2023, she was sitting in the left seat, in the captain's position. Beside her was an instructor with 32 years of experience. Everything was leading toward her soon receiving her authorization. A few more such flights, a few more checks, and she would become a captain, officially, finally. And then his hand reached for the wrong lever, and everything ended. After the disaster, Pokhara Airport was closed, briefly, for the duration of the rescue operation. The runway was inspected and checked for wreckage. It was opened again. Life goes on. Planes must fly. The next day, the government of Nepal declared a day of national mourning. Flags were at half-mast. Official figures made statements, words that changed nothing. Yeti Airlines canceled all flights. A wave of grief swept the country, and a wave of questions. Newspapers came out with photos of the victims on their front pages. TV channels played the video of the crash over and over again. How could such a thing happen? Why did a highly experienced instructor confuse the levers? Why did no one notice? Why didn't the system give a signal? Why couldn't the plane recover? There are answers, but they are not comforting. The human factor. Two words that hide everything. Muscle memory. Automatism. The hand reached for where it was used to going, but this time, just slightly to the left. Just missing. Millimeters. And those millimeters cost 72 lives. Kamal KC was the best. One of the best. But even the best make mistakes. This is the curse of aviation. A system is only as safe as the human within it. And a human is always vulnerable.
Tired, distracted, thinking about something else. A hand trembled, and that's it. Nepal is a country with difficult aviation. Mountains, gorges, short runways squeezed between slopes, weather that changes in minutes. It lacks the infrastructure found in Europe or the US. There is no precise meteorological data for every gorge, no radars that see every square kilometer, no backup systems at every step. There is no money for all of that. The pilots here are different. They are used to risk. They fly where others would not. They land on runways that would be closed as dangerous in other countries. They work in conditions that a European regulator would call unacceptable. But sometimes that is not enough. Sometimes experience does not save. Sometimes it kills. Because experience creates automatism, and automatism is both a blessing and a curse. In 2013, the European Commission blacklisted all Nepalese airlines. All of them, without exception. Yeti Airlines, Buddha Air, Nepal Airlines, all were banned from flying over European Union territory. Not specific aircraft, all the country's airlines. The reason was phrased dryly: systemic safety problems. This doesn't mean that every flight is dangerous. It means that the system as a whole is unreliable, that control is weak, that standards are insufficient, that sooner or later, something will happen. Flight 691 became another entry on that list, another piece of evidence that the system fails, that people die.
That nothing changes. That after every disaster, there is mourning and investigation, promises and reforms on paper. And then, the next disaster. And somewhere in this story is a woman who came to aviation to be closer to her deceased husband, who for 17 years flew in the same sky, who almost became a captain, and who died herself, in the same company, on the same type of route, from someone else's mistake, a hand that rested on the wrong lever. Her body was never found. 71 people were found. She was not. One could say a coincidence. The chaos of destruction, fire, wreckage. One could say just bad luck. They didn't have time. They didn't reach her. Or one could say nothing. Just look at this story, at all these coincidences, at the husband who died in a plane crash, at the wife who entered his profession, at 17 years of flying, at the instructor with a flawless reputation, at his hand which at the decisive moment moved to the wrong place, and at the body that was not found. Sometimes in disasters there is no mysticism, only physics, fatigue, and human errors. And sometimes there is something else, something that has no name, something that makes a story unfold in a certain way, too certain to be a coincidence. Flight 691 is one of those stories.